Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners can get together to talk, listen, and learn from each other. I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, one of the few people on the planet that actually need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Hello, Soraya.
Hi. Well,
how are you?
Good to be with you. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Welcome to our version of Talking Acquisition. So let's talk about I know there's some things you want to get out of the way early, just to kind of level set, and then we're going to dive right in.
Sure. Well, I have a quick disclaimer. So our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions. Okay, so a few political opinions might slip out here and there, so I'll just let that go. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders, and we believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. Over to you, Will.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Soraya. So, episode 1, this is the launch, episode 1. And it's very interesting timing for this episode 1. This is a time of the year where kind of interesting things start occurring in our business. This is the life we've chosen, and this is really when things start happening kind of crazy. So I'd like to talk about our theme for this first episode is end of the fiscal year, and specifically kind of the tales of the crypt from the end of the fiscal year. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great topic to cover. September happens to be my favorite month for 2 reasons. 1, it is the end of the fiscal year, and 2, because it's my birthday month.
Hey.
And for all those procurement professionals out there who have a birthday this month, happy birthday. I'm sorry you don't get to celebrate because you got to work late every night. I'm just kidding. No, this is a great topic to cover because it is the end of the fiscal year. And like many fiscal years, we confront, number 1, getting all our obligations in the books, making sure that we meet the needs of our customers and fulfill their mission objectives and ensure that their funds get properly obligated. But more importantly, it's also the time that we start to plan for the new fiscal year that's coming up. Absolutely. And unfortunately, like we do so much and so often in federal government, we have to have contingency plans in the event that an appropriation doesn't get passed or a continuing resolution doesn't get passed. So it's a real busy time of year for our acquisition professionals across the government, be they program managers, financial analysts, or acquisitions personnel. It's just a really busy time of year. And I just remember it so well. This is probably the first year that on September 30th, I'll be just like kicking back and relaxing, thinking about my colleagues and not doing a damn thing.
Yeah, I get it. You know, it was 23 years when I was in government before the first time I actually took time off in September. It's like, because when you're young in the craft, you're trying to make a reputation.
Exactly.
And then when you're senior in the craft, you have responsibilities. Okay.
And the staff tries to kick you out when you're senior because they don't really want you to see
that's right.
how the sausage is made.
Get out of the way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard stories of like people bringing in food and all kinds of stuff. Anything from your experience in that space?
So, oh yeah. I was in this business a long time as well, 40 years. And when I came into the senior leadership role, I tried to make the end of the fiscal year as comfortable as possible for my staff. And what I mean by that was, number 1, I was always engaging with the customers, trying to find out what was coming down the pike, what was important, what were the priorities, constantly having conversations to try to take some of the pressure off the staff. But then I also tried to do fun stuff, right? So I always brought in food at the end of the fiscal year. I could tell you so many stories. And in fact, I had a reputation. If they smelled Popeyes in the hallways of 7th and D, you knew it was the end of the fiscal year and Soraya had just fed her staff. But it was always trying to make it take some of the pressure off the staff, and to make myself accessible to them, to address some of those little problems that come up, that sometimes the customer doesn't want to listen because they're under the gun to get their monies obligated,
Yeah.
and they're asking you to do something that perhaps doesn't make a lot of sense for the end of the year. I'm not going to say something wrong, because that's not true. A lot of times what they really wanted, hey, I really need this done, and I'm trying to get it under this vehicle or whatever. And sometimes the staff had to say, can't do it that way.
Sure.
And so sometimes it fell upon us, the leadership, to provide that top cover, to go in and help the customer understand, and to find solutions.
Yeah.
And that's what I was always fond of telling the staff. Bring me the problem. Let's sit down. Let's talk it through. We might be able to find an answer. And this is also a time of year where those partnerships come into play, right? You better be building those relationships throughout the year, because there are certain people you need. You need your legal counsel. You need your financial people, because they're telling you whether this money is good, whether the money is available, and they're the ones that help you obligate it on the books. And you need those customers, those program officials. This is when those relationships come into play.
Absolutely. I often said, Soraya, when I was attempting to effectively lead teams, that effective Q4s were actually started in Q1. Now it sounds kind of sounds intuitive. Of course it starts in Q1, but it's like all of the things, all of the tools that you will leverage to spin straw into gold in the fourth quarter. Those things actually start in the first quarter. It is those relationships. I always believed in doing hot washes of the previous fiscal, of the end of the fiscal. So while the pain is still fresh, like, let's go talk about it. Let's go do the forensics on all the things that just happened in the last Q4, in Q1, in the new Q1. And then let's go do surgery on that thing. Sometimes surgery was with a scalpel, the small things, small tweaks, small shifts, small pivots. And then sometimes we did surgery with an axe. It's like, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. So it is those types of things that happen. That happens in Q1. And you leverage those things. Sometimes it's education and training, whatever those things you find in those after action hot washes, those are the building blocks for the effective fourth quarter to come.
So I used to tell my staff all the time, and they got sick and tired of hearing this. Plan is a 4-letter word, right? You got to plan. So one of the things that I kicked in when I was an HCA, I tried to do this as much as possible. And certainly when I became Chief Procurement Officer, this was my mantra. And that was, we got to be a little bit more willing. We, the procurement community, the acquisition community, have to be more accepting of the fact that you're not going to see your budget till probably January, February.
Right.
Because even if Congress passes a budget, let's say they did pass an appropriation, by the time they do all the apportionments and all that good stuff, and they get the money on the books, the PRs really don't get processed till probably around December or January at best, right? So we had to back off and say, we're going to plan. So what I instituted was what I call the $0 PR. Send me a PR in advance that tells me exactly what you're looking for, so I can log it in the books. And it would not have any money, because you can't obligate money that you don't have, but it would tell me what your intended commitment was.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that 9 times out of 10, the programs already know what's probably going to come through on the budget. They pretty much have a good idea of what programs and what they're going to spend. And we could start planning. And one of the things that I was really pushing for was bringing industry in as early as possible. Because a lot of times when you get to the end of the year and everybody goes, oh my God, you're in a spending frenzy. You're not really in a spending frenzy. You're spending money that you had already planned on spending back in October. It's just that because of the procurement lead time and how money falls out and how negotiations work and whether you get protests and all these other good things that happen, it lands towards the end of the fiscal year. And so I wanted to distinguish between that and what is truly what you call end of year spending, where you have unfunded requirements. And now you have funds available, meaning there were funds because either things didn't cost as much or you had to defer a program, and now you can move this money over to work it on something else. Those are called unfunded requirements. And those things are going to come in naturally in the August, September timeframe, because that's when you know that you're doing that.
You got money.
And essentially, there's a stigma when people see big obligations going on the books at the end of September, everything's, oh, they're on a spending frenzy. When in reality, no, that was exactly when it was going to land. So telling that story becomes extremely important, because sometimes our legislators out on the Hill, I mean, I had to go up and brief along with my budget director often why we spent so much at the end of fiscal year. And I had to help them understand that that was really the dynamic that was going on. It wasn't that people just throwing money out there. It was really legitimate expenditures that either landed at the end of the fiscal year because the contract expired then, or unfunded requirements that they knew about, but they didn't know if they would have funding for, right? If the funding would be available for it. So really important to understand that dynamic. Okay.
Yeah, I remember when I joined DHS, this was 2009, 2010 time frame, on the Chief Procurement Officer staff. I remember doing the forensics on the previous years, and we found the data that suggested that 45% of the spend was actually happening in the last 25%, last quarter of the year. And I used, the thing that used to challenge, that I had to wrestle with and challenge in my head is, what about the people? You know, what are we doing to the people? You know, it felt like episodes of The Walking Dead in October, okay? Because we didn't have another group, another cadre, or another staff just kind of in a closet somewhere that we could pull them out and unleash them in the fourth quarter. It was the same individuals, the same staffs that all the components had, all the component contracting activities had in second quarter and third quarter. Those were the same individuals that were doing 45% of the spend in the last. So any thoughts on, you know, your experiences from, what about the people, you know, from a standpoint of, you know, how do we encourage them to go through this process and survive it, and then come back in October and say, come on, let's do it again?
Well, first of all, you let them take their leave before. I'm just kidding, I'm joking about that. But one of the things that I always found, first of all, the heart and spirit is there. I can't tell you, and I even get emotional when I think about it, the commitment of these people. They're there to get the job done, and they're going to do it. And I can remember, you know, back even in the 90s, we were still doing this. In the early 2000s, we got way better. I mean, I'm going to tell you, fiscal year end now is light years ahead of what it used to be.
Yes,
I can remember being in my office till 3 a.m, and you know that I was head of contracting at ICE where you were, and we had that Dallas and California office. So their midnight came 3 hours, right? And I can remember being in the office till 3 a.m, 4 a.m, and then coming back the next morning to work with finance to make sure our books
clean it up,
properly reconciled, right? They were like 8 o'clock in the morning with the CFO going, okay, now let's see if we got this right. But my point is this: the people are committed and they're dedicated, and they signed up for this job, and they know that this is what they're going to do. And what they need is good, inspiring, motivational leadership that says, I get it, I know this is going on, and here's what I'm going to do to help you. Here are the tools and the resources that I'm going to put in place to help you. So a couple of things about DHS. DHS has really done a great job. They don't get the credit that they deserve. Every single HCA generally puts out a letter at the beginning of the year that tells their customers, if you want something done in this methodology, you know, competitive procurement, what have you, we need to have your PR no later than blah, 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 whatever the date is, right? That's extremely important because it helps for planning. Now, of course, if you don't have your appropriations, you know, that kind of blows those deadlines, but that's where the $0 PR comes in. But the most important thing that I've seen is where the HCAs have really built those relationships with the program managers to start having that discussion early. Here's what's coming. Here's what we're thinking. Here's the big picture items. Here's the little things that we think might happen at the end of the year. And then staying constantly, regularly engaged in those communications to know what's coming in. But also teaching their folks to do that. That at the contracting officer level, at the contract specialist level, you can have those conversations. You should be having those conversations. Maybe have a regular recurring meeting with your customers where you've listed out your requirements and you can continually reprioritize. Because that's the other thing that people don't think about. Priorities change throughout the year. You have hurricanes, you have border surges, you have whatever you want to call it, right? There's something going on and it might shift your priorities, and you have to think about that. Last but not least, one of the best tools that we really have come up with, and we at DHS worked very hard on this. We started this at the very beginning, as you'll recall, strategic sourcing. I'm not going to even say category manager. I'm going to say strategic sourcing. Getting vehicles in place that make it easier for the contracting officer to be able to turn to a vehicle. We kind of know what you're going to do at the end of the year. year. You kind of know what the unfunded requirements are, right? You know that you're probably going to update your PC inventory, right? Or you're going to buy equipment for the Border Patrol, or you're going to buy services to do certain studies that were really nice to have, but if I don't have the funding, I'll defer that to another year. So having vehicles in place that provide those kinds of solutions, those equipment contracts in place, those services contracts in place, BPAs we used to call them, or BPAs, indefinite quantity contracts. We did testing solution contracts, right? We did PPE contracts. Important stuff like that. FEMA has gotten really good about having, this contingency contract inventory.
Sure.
So it makes it easier for those COs when they have to hit the ground running to go in and negotiate an order. Because you can do an order in a matter of days, sometimes in a matter of hours if you need to, right? Yeah. Versus having to do a full competitive procurement. So I think that is one of the tools and resources that we've gotten better at. Of course, working with OMB, they put the best in class procurements in place, and we went to the world of category management, which really is strategic sourcing on steroids. That's really what it is.
Yeah,
right?
gotcha.
I mean, that's the way I like to describe it, right?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think what you're tapping into, Sarai, is just a version of what I used to call, let's do data-based management. Let's go look at the data. The data will inform a lot of your activity time and time again.
Exactly.
I remember when we looked at we had 11 big categories of spend. It's like, okay, here are the 11. We know we can look at every component and we can see what they're do a spend analysis on each one of those. One of the things someone would consider in an after action report is, let's go look at the spend. What did we just do? And we know 80 to 90% of the spend is the same year over year over year after year, at least in the categories. The levels may change, but the categories are pretty much the same. Let's go build solutions for those. If any of those solutions were hard last year, those are the targets that we should be building solutions in first, second, and third quarter. So it's not hard, in fourth quarter when the time comes again.
And if I may add, in building those solutions, one of the things we did, our community at DHS, we got really smart and started thinking about building some of those vehicles to address two things, not only end of year spend, but how we met our goals for competition, for small business. We created procurements that were designated for service disabled veteran-owned small businesses. Why? We found out in looking at the data, there were a ton of companies that did this kind of stuff that could support us in certain areas. We did it for hub zones. We've done it for women-owned small business. Smart procurements that enable us to do two things at once. One, make sure that we cover our customers and give them vehicles that they can use to cover these unfunded requirements or even the funded requirements. But two, and more importantly, supporting these small businesses, supporting the companies that are out there. And that's what I think the strategic sourcing program, the category management system has brought to us, that we've been able to do that more smartly. The other thing that we did at DHS that I really appreciated was we wrote our strategically sourced vehicles and we didn't charge any fees to our components, because they could place their own orders. It was our contract.
I remember those.
Yeah. And so it was about creating that convenience, and it brought in that unity of effort. We worked together to build these things. And so our communications and reliance upon one another became much better. And, as I always say, there's safety in numbers, right? We can help each other out. We can support one another. We can make those fiscal year ends a little bit less painful for our staffs.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love when you talk about staff. It just takes me back to, I remember the years where I had often said, I'm the person that cuts the lights off. Okay, so I'm the last one out. Okay, so let's build a system. I'm not interested in being here till 4 o'clock. It may happen, but I'm not interested. So let's do the things. Let's do the activities that will make sure that I cut the lights off. And I was surprised, and I think it was intuitive for me, but I was surprised at the response that received. It's like, the boss is gonna cut the lights off, So it's just a different dynamic from a leadership perspective. Those are the things that staffs, your teams are looking for. They're looking for you to lead from the front, take on the responsibility, take on some of the risk, along with those models, and be the kind of I always like to think of it as the chief relationship builder. But to your point, push that relationship building down as low as possible, because it's going to take all of those relationships to spin strong to goal at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, and you raise a good point about being the one that turns off the lights. Even as chief procurement officer, I try to be as accessible as possible to everyone. I usually, even though they didn't want me there at the end of
Right,
the
right.
right? They didn't want me there at the end of the fiscal. They're like, go home. Yeah, it's okay. We got it all
You
done.
got
Go
it.
home. Go home. We got it, right? I would still always stick around. It was very rare that I left anybody behind. And if I did, I was sitting here with the phone in hand to answer any question, to approve anything that needed to be done, because it is extremely important that you are available to them. And even some of the decisions that didn't have to rise to my level, sometimes I'd say, hey, bring it to me.
Yeah, I got
Let's
it.
talk. If you
Yeah,
have to go tell a customer this thing is not going to get obligated, we're not going to be able to get this thing done, that's a tough conversation to have on 30 September. And so
absolutely.
sometimes that means it needs to be me. Or sometimes even, approaching legal counsel because you're trying to do something that perhaps is a little thorny, right? And so you want to go talk to legal counsel.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to have someone like us, the leaders around, to have that conversation. But I think the most important thing is recognizing that these people just do an incredible job.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
they're not only taking care of this fiscal year end, but they're doing the contingency planning for next year. And more often than not, that is what really happens in September. This last week of September is extremely busy because they're not only doing the work that they have to do to finish the year, but they're starting to plan for the next year. They have to have contingency plans in place in case, September 30th comes and goes and we don't have a continuing resolution. Because even if it's for a few days, you still have to put those contingency plans in place. And that brings me to industry. Because industry, we've been talking about the federal workforce, but industry goes through the same process because there are partners. And
Yes.
so they're sitting there burning the midnight oil to answer the questions, to put together any proposals last minute, to give you last minute information, to help you put things in place. That's what they do. So they suffer the same consequence as we do. And they're actively watching what's happening from a continuing resolution standpoint or a budget standpoint. They're constantly watching what the agencies are doing and trying to find ways to help us improve the process. And that's the reality. So, my hat's off to the industry procurement personnel and program personnel, because they're doing the same thing that our acquisition community across the federal government is doing.
Yeah, Soraya, I think that I've lived on that side of the table now for over 2.5 years. And it is surprising that on the other side of the table, even though I know the processes, I know the plays that are going to be called, it's like, wow, it's different over there. It's kind of like it's kind of like asking a goldfish how's the water. It's like, what water? It's all this is just my environment. But as soon as you go to the other side, there's truly water there. It's like, okay, this is very different. So the responsiveness, the engagement, the being there as a government contractor, you're in a service provider role. Yes, there's a business to be run, but I think showing up in a service provider role, how can I advance government wants, needs, and aspirations, their requirements? How can I lean in? How can I bring my business talents, okay, and my services or product talents, how can I bring those to bear to advance government roles? So the kind of the government's place in executing mission. So you're so spot on the industry participant is I think just as valuable, because we couldn't do it without them. So that's why I say it's just as valuable, to be able to execute as a collective, and I think that's really the goal.
And look, it's a challenging environment, but it also can be fun, right? You can also have a lot of fun with it. One of the things that I'm fond of saying is we laughed a lot at the end of the fiscal year. We had a good time, and I think that's the most important thing is you got to have fun with it. You got to want to be in this business to be in this business, and you got to find the fun in it. And I always did. I was one of those contracting officers. I mean, I can remember many a night being in the office till well beyond midnight. Before even systems were actually integrated and you had to actually manually key in your obligations and then reconcile the books. Yeah, I'm that old. Yeah, well, I'm that old. Anyway, that I remember these things. But I always found that it brought us closer together because procurement is actually a team sport. It really is.
It really
talk
is.
About acquisition and procurement, it's really a team sport, and it's all the elements have to come together to make these things happen. You need your legal counsel, you need your financial people, you need your program officials, and you need your industry. Industry is extremely important to what you're trying to do. Whether, and I should go beyond industry and talk about even just the private sector in general, whether
In
it's
general,
academia,
sure.
because sometimes we're doing grants and other contractual agreements that
Academia.
impact that
Yeah.
entire community, right?
Yeah,
So
agreed.
when I say industry, I really mean the entire public sector. We come together. These are important partnerships. We can't do it alone. And I'm just so proud of the work that's done in our profession every single year throughout the year, but especially at this time of year.
Yeah, me too. It always makes me proud. You know, I have a favorite movie, it's Godfather 2. And there's a scene in Godfather 2 where Michael Corleone saying, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. But then at the end of that line, he says, but this is the life we have chosen. You know, and I believe that's my theme for the, you know, kind of the government procurement contracts, acquisition, you know, government contracting committee. This is the life we have chosen. So, you know, we should not complain. We should lean in, and we should bring our talents and our energy and our drive to the fight, you know, because it takes all of that. And I think at the end, we are so very successful. When you look back year over year over year over year, nothing but success in the books. So the expectation is we will continue that going forward.
And it gets better each year. I actually see significant improvement happening year over year. I can remember when it was a time that it was impossible, it was hard to cobble together, you know, the procurement request reports, right? Getting, you know, reports of what was pending and what's going on. And now it's like clockwork. I was getting these reports the last 5 years at the end, in the month of September, usually in the last couple of weeks of September, I was getting a report on a daily basis. Here's what's in the queue. Here's what we know is coming. Here's what we're sending back because it just can't be done, or what they're asking for can't be done. And believe you me, that happened. A lot of people don't know that. There are things that come to us that we go, but can't do that one. That's not going to happen. It's not enough time, or move your money off of that. We're going to obligate it next year. And there are a lot of things that we do defer to the next fiscal year because we are making prudent business decisions, and they are data-based. They are truly based on the information, the data that we're collecting. So, you know, that's one of the things that I do like to highlight, is that there is significant improvement year over year in how we're doing this, and we're just getting so much better at it. However, if I could be queen for a day, we'd have multi-year budgets, right?
Yeah.
Then we just have to fight once every few years. Have multi-year budgets and try to find a way to take some of the pressure off, because I think when we take some of that pressure off, we make better business decisions, and we certainly move the ball forward more efficiently and more effectively, and make life better for our employees.
Agreed. So Sarai, you know, one of the things we talked about when we said we were going to do this is, like, we could talk all day about these things because we just love the community, love and honor the craft. But I know we're getting to our desired point in time. So at this point, I'd like to make sure that we always end one of these with actionable stuff. Okay, like some nuggets, if you will. So if you have a nugget when thinking about kind of our theme of end of the fiscal year, what would be the nugget? Whatever community you seek to share that with, or maybe across communities, what would be that end of the fiscal year nugget?
So I think my nuggets are going to apply to everybody in the community, and that is be patient, be good to one another, talk to one another, have communications, pick up that phone and call one another and discuss what's going on, recognize each other's position. In other words, be empathetic towards one another, get rest, drink plenty of fluids, have a few alcoholic beverages if you still care to, not while you're working. But remember one thing, what you do is valued and appreciated. You are what keeps us strong. I want to say a big thank you to all the men and women out there, all the folks out there that are working in this business right now. They're going to be burning the midnight oil over the next couple of days. Thank you for what you do. It is valued and it is appreciated.
Oh, that's awesome, Sarai. I just want to go sign some contracts right now. You know, so if I had a golden nugget, mine would be this. I think the leaders, the team leaders, project leaders, division directors, whatever the leaders are in our three communities, the contracts community, the acquisition community, our program offices, and our private sector community. I think my message, my nugget to them would be, I think our roles in this time, we wear two t-shirts. We wear two t-shirts. The first t-shirt is head cheerleader. Break out your pom-poms and cheer for your teams, okay? Cheer for your team. First job, head cheerleader. Second t-shirt we wear is head roadblock remover, okay? That's the job, what your team is looking for. And we talked about it earlier. Sometimes they don't even want you around, but when they need you, it is to remove a roadblock. So be head cheerleader and chief roadblock remover. That's gonna be I think that's the nugget that I would leave to the various communities at this point. That's the ask, that's the need, I think. And when I go back to my thinking of when I was operationally in contracts, the thing that I needed the most was the cheerleader and the roadblock remover. So I encourage our teams to do that.
No, that's fantastic. And I just want to throw a little extra in there.
Okay, please.
Make sure you're doing that all year round.
Fair enough.
You should be the cheerleader and the head roadblock remover. Rah, rah, you're right. Too bad I don't have my pom-poms.
And with that, Soraya, episode 1 in the can. Thank you very much. This has been fun. I've enjoyed the conversation. As I said, our greatest challenge will be stopping because I've got so much more I want to say and talk about and more opinions. But thank you so very much. And any last words?
No, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I hope our audience has enjoyed it too, and we look forward to hearing from them.
All right.
I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Next week. Absolutely. And with that, take care, folks. All the best, and we see you next week. Bye-bye.